Amensol Shadow. In the Shadow of the Sun, Part 3. The young man sitting across from Cole was calling for the barkeep to bring him another ale. He was a regular here, since he had found a place to rent in the quiet of Avendir's Pass, not quite the Thronefast, the capital city of men. He had a commanding presence for someone his size. He wasn't a big man, but anyone could see he was strong and formidable. A trait honed after many years of back-breaking chores on an equestrian ranch in the eastern plains of Kingsreach. He turned his attention back to Cole, a man who alleged to be his estranged father, a man he did not know. Cole began. So, like you, I was raised on a farm without the blessings of parental guidance. My father died before I was born. 'Twas the fate sacrificing himself to protect a man who, in the end, failed in so many ways to protect me once he was gone. Coincidentally, it was the man who left me with this, Cole said, his right arm swirling around, an ornate hook fastened to the end of it. He continued. My mother died on the day Haven Sound burned to the ground. By another twist of fate, she was the one who gave the order to set it on fire, thereby saving the citizens of Havensong. She fought on behalf of the king with none other than the fallen god Asari himself, and her death was invalidated by the supreme idiocy of Amensol, who instead of spending the time ushering his people to safety, died not so much at the hand of Asari, but from an extreme case of hubris. The young man chuckled at the remark. It was only about 2 moons ago when the Thronefast Memorial was held. Some pilgrimaged all the way to the Silent Sanctum, where Avendir had made memorial stones to remember the lives lost in battle. Others participated in the memorial with a day of fasting, followed by a festival which started the following morning that symbolized the time of desolation before the eventual victory over Asari and the feast that followed. People would recite pieces of the speech given by Amensol over the years, and older folks would tell stories of the war and the king. The young man had picked up on the fact that King Avendir went out of his way to make the most of his father's legacy, naming the capital after the throne, naming the mountain pass leading to the capital after himself. Amensol's ego was anything like his son's. He got that joke without needing to know him. Cole noticed a smile from the man sitting across from him. It was the first time since he sat down. There was something about his easy, nonchalant smile that reminded Cole of his mother, the one who should have been celebrated during the Thronefast Memorial. So I went to live with Alistan and my family's estate in the Central Plains near the foundations of Havensong. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect life. You're not riding in a parade, Cole. Stop trying to keep your back straight, Alistan yelled from outside the corral. He had fitted Cole's hook with a bushing that held a bow to the end of his arm. Cole had been practicing for a few hours per week, hitting targets from horseback, one of his mother's specialties. Generally, in sport or war, proper posture was key to success, but the whole body had to work as a spring to even out the jolts of riding on the back of a speeding horse. And this meant that the proper posture was none at all. Get loose, Alistan chimed in again. Cole reached back into his quiver, hooked to the side of the saddle for easy access. He was very good at knocking his arrows on the move, but absorbing enough of the pounding to keep his arm straight had proven much more difficult than his mother had made it look. He let another arrow fly. The grass in front of the hay bale, Cole yelled in frustration. If I get any looser, I'm gonna fall off my saddle, Alistan, said the 16-year-old. Fine, sighed Alistan. 10 more shots and come in the house for dinner. Alistan walked a short distance from the stables to the house, removed his muddy boots and stepped inside. The estate of Corinna's parents had been a labor of love. They had worked diligently in the early years of the arrival of the humans on Terminus. King Amensol had repaid them with the resources necessary to build a home for themselves. And Corinna's father did not do anything halfway. Stone-walled stables, workshops, and a simple yet elegant home lined the front edge of the property. Several pens separated the pasture land behind that stretched far into the distance. Cole trotted his horse over to one of the stables and put his gear away. led the horse out to one of the pastures and released it to join the herd grazing under the evening sun. Cole headed back toward the house and rounded the front fence when he heard the bell at the entrance to the property. Someone was announcing their arrival. Cole's grandfather had installed a large bell down the path at the edge of their property as a way to signal peaceful visitors in order to limit the tensions that came with knocking and rustling at the door. There had been very few times since humans arrived in Terminus where one could be at ease. Cole looked down the path and noticed the banner first, crimson with a fighting line. It was the king's banner. The rider approached the house at a canter. It wasn't the king approaching. "Lorne!" Cole exclaimed, running to meet him. The general of the army of men was an infrequent visitor, but Cole's favorite person from Thronefast. "Cole," Lorne shot back. "Don't think, no time." Lorne threw some cloth into the air he had pulled out of a satchel. Cole quickly paced off a few feet, and in one smooth motion, slid his dagger from its sheath and flicked it toward the flying target. It hit center mass and handle first, as he had intended. The cloth fell heavily to the ground as Cole ran over to greet his old friend. "So good to see you're practicing, boy," Lorne said, wrapping his arms around the young man who seemed to look more like his father every visit. Cole raced to retrieve his dagger, held it with cloth it was wrapped up in. It was a heavy and ornate trim tunic, a deep blue flirting with black. Around its collar was embroidered symbols, a white line that grew larger on its end, and at the tip it widened to engulf a red circle. The symbol repeated around the entire collar. Cole admired the handiwork for a moment and handed it back to Lorne. "No, Cole, this shirt is for you," Lorne said, smiling at Cole. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. "These shirts were recently ordered, special for this year's memorial. One is to be given to each surviving soldier who fought at the Sanctum. I wanted to give yours to you in person, for valor above and beyond your calling." Cole's eyes widened. "I wasn't a soldier, but I'll take it. Thank you so much," he replied. "Well, you might as well have been. You have the battle scars to show for it." Lorne grabbed Cole's right arm and held up the stub left after his hand and wrist were taken during the final battle when he was 10. Cole always felt comfortable around Lorne, since he went out of his way to make his missing member seem so natural and insignificant. Someone who wouldn't think twice about grabbing someone's arm would generally withdraw at the thought of grabbing an arm that was missing its hand, as if it were any different. But it made Cole feel so at ease. Allison stepped out of the house and hollered at the guest from a good 40 paces from the front door. "Oh no," Allison cried. "Don't tell me there's been a drafting. If I'm being called back into service, I want a job at a writing desk." Lorne stepped through the gate, met Allison halfway between the house and his horse, who was being led to the stables by Cole for feeding and unpacking. Lorne generally stayed the night after taking the long trek to their house from Thronefast. "How are you, my friend?" Lorne said, embracing Alistan. The two stood there for a moment, reminiscing quietly to themselves at the sight of their fellow war hero. "Well, don't just stand around," Allison finally said. "Come in. Just like you to show up in time for an evening meal." Allison turned his head and shouted at the side of the house, "Cole, finish up, come inside for supper." Lorne leaned back in his chair at the table, wiped some crumbs from his short manicured beard. The meal truly was fit for a king: roasted beef, root vegetables, and local fruits. Cole's family's ranch was a money maker, needing very little staff and some of the best horse trainers among men and elves. Coupled with farming some local produce, Cole would never be in one as long as his inheritance was handled wisely. "So," Allison smiled faintly at Lorne. It was a look of politeness given to soften a coming blow. "I imagine that presence and a want to escape city life is not all that brought you here, General." Lorne understood the chided remark from Allison, referring to him as General, assuming he was here on state business. "Hey, it's not like that, Allison, I promise," Lorne answered. Cole knew what happened when politics came up in the household. "Well, I really should go feed the horses and put out the lamps. Excuse..." "No, Cole," Allison said. "You just stick around for a little. You're old enough to take part in these discussions." "Go on, Lorne." So just so we are clear, this is not the only reason I came here today, Lorne protested. I do hate living in the city day after day. I come back between war overseas and return not to a plowshare, but to training for more war. Lorne paused for a second before continuing. There's a problem at the King's Hall, Lorne said in low tones. Alaston looked away and sighed, trying not to convey an apathy toward all things Avendir. As you know, Minister Narian Castigue has been in the King's Hall now for almost a full year. His research into the ancient dragon writings has caused quite a stir, as more political powers heard rumors of their survival. The stories seem more outlandish every day. Well, like what? Cole inserted, having his interest piqued by the thought of outlandish stories. Well, there's a rumor going around now that Narian has been invited by the God King of the Dwarves himself, Lord Kazas, to accompany him on a quest to seek out one of the royal dragons to inquire about the research. Cole's eyes widened. Rumor is that Narian stood in a mystical cave and spoke to the dragon directly, confronted it, and walked away with an unknown powerful information. What a load of rubbish, Alaston said, rolling his eyes. That tale has been around for a few years now. It gets more outlandish every time that pompous egomaniac opens his mouth. The original story was told to his companion, Elder Greyborn from the Elven Council. He had been allowed to sleep in a stockroom while researching in Kadasa. He couldn't get a real room since all the dwarves took him for a nut. The stockroom was where he had stayed, had a secret passage, which, as it happened that night, was actually traveled by Kazas. So he really did have an adventure with Kazas? Wow, Cole remarked. No, he didn't. He was awakened when Kazas and a companion of his burst through the hidden door. Apparently Narian spoke of his research, and Kazas told him he had learned nothing of the dragon accord from a dragon he had met recently. Once that door was shut, Narian could not reopen it to see where it went. Narian may be a researcher by trade, but he is a natural fabricator of events. Well, true or not, Lorne spoke up. He has captured the ear of many who believe at some of his claims. He's a herald while drunk, spouting all manner of wild things about his research, which are finding themselves out in the public square and then beyond. Allison swore under his breath. Yeah, I happened to be there when the initial discoveries were made showcasing the power of the dragon tongue. You do need to fear this threat, Lorne. The king doesn't know what power he is flirting with, or the consequences of opening the box. Well, why? Is what Narian doing so bad? Cole asked. It seemed to him that some great power that we have would be a good thing for men. We'll follow it out to its logical conclusions, Cole, Alaston said, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms. Avendir is seeking power. Power not presently known to any other that we know of. Other leaders learn of this, formulate opinions. Do we join with men? Do we race to get the information ourselves? Do we take what men have? Do we eliminate the threat while we can? Well, we are already into this step, Lorne interrupted. Avendir has been making many state calls, providing my men as mercenaries to other leaders to assist with their battles. He's been setting up trade deals, proposing treaties. He's building a coalition of favored nations that can help with the pieces of Narian's puzzle. Some are not even aware of this chess match being played. They're blindly accepting the gifts from Avendir as goodwill, and he's winning them over. You know how charismatic he can be. So you see, Cole, Alaston continued, the level of your perception shapes the way you see the world. One sees a gracious king, seeking peace and mutual respect from his neighbors. Another sees a tyrant, trying to build an army to take over those unworthy or unwilling to join his cause. And another, reading the context of both sides, sees an oblivious ruler, stumbling about in the dark after his own ambitions, failing to see the outcomes of his decisions. Lorne sat in silence, having worked that issue out for himself before ever leaving on this trip. Alaston continued, he will build a coalition of nations while leaving others out. Others see him gaining stature, searching for a magical power greater than any other nation. Now this pits one coalition against rogue nations who feel like banding together is the best option. And this leads to a total world war. Again. Not from an outside threat as the ravaging Lord brought, but neighbor state against neighbor state, when none are safe, where all villages and hovels are now battlefields. And all this for a blind quest for power you don't even understand. This is why that fool Nerican Castigue must be stopped. A silence fell on the room for a moment, as all let the weight of the issue sink in. Lorne finally spoke up. As much as I feel this is concerning enough, this is not even what has been on my mind, and is partially the reason for my visit. Lorne pushed back from the table and stood. Cole's eyes were fixed on Lorne, pacing back and forth by the table as Lorne tried to find the words he needed to solicit Alliston. "Come on, my friend. News doesn't age well," Alliston said, smirking and trying to ease his old companion. Avendir's moves have reached the ears of would-be enemies. Alliston sighed into his hands, playing in his mind where this was headed. "I've received some intelligence from one of our sources," Lorne continued, "and they have reported the presence of a known assassin heading across the country toward Thronefast." "Who is he?" Cole asked. Alliston waved his hands at Cole, not wanting him to interrupt with little details like that. Could be any number of groups, most likely Red Raven. Go on, Lorne. A coded note was covertly read that belonged to the assassin that we believe are instructions to eliminate Avendir and Nerian at the King's Hall. Alliston looked up from the table at Lorne, who was leaning over a chair, weighing down on Alliston. "Wait," Cole spoke up again, shooting out of his chair in his newfound adult zeal. "Why doesn't the King's Guard just maintain a constant presence around the King? We have plenty of soldiers to keep them safe, don't we?" Lorne was still watching Alliston for reaction, and Alliston finally spoke up. "They can't, boy. If they show they know now of this conspiracy, those involved will go into hiding, find new ways to operate in the shadows. We lose the advantage. If we suddenly build up a contingency around the King, that also signals other allies or enemies that we are about to act on something others will not appreciate and could start the beginning of the end. This must be handled with discretion, Cole," Lorne said firmly. He looked back at Alliston. "My friend, I trust no one else. You have been out of the light for so long, you would set off no signals of any kind. You know the oath that I swore to myself. I'm pleading with you, Alliston, that I would not set foot in that city of deception. You're my best option and you know it. And I will not fight for that king anymore. Do it for your people, Alliston. The people get no more of me," Alliston shouted at Lorne. Cole was too uncomfortable to take his eyes off the floor in front of him. "Lorne," Alliston said quietly, "I have given everything I am willing to give to this king and to these people. You know I will not do this." Lorne looked at him defeated. "Well, you know I had to try." Alliston felt the weight that his friend carried. Alliston considered his choice to leave the King's Council in all its glory a noble cause. But he knew that Lorne's decision to stay was also noble, not wanting to abandon his troops nor the ones who he had fought so hard to protect. As much as he knew Avendir's path would eventually lead to war, he also knew that Avendir's assassination would also lead to war. Alliston finally rose from his chair while the other two watched for his reaction. "Cole," Alliston said in a commanding tone, "bring me that gray satchel from you-know-where." Cole's eyes lit up. "Are you serious?" Cole exclaimed with a shocked look on his face. "Go." "Lorne, I imagine that this act is close to fruition." Lorne looked confused. "Well, actually, yes. I have to be ready by tomorrow night. What is in this gray satchel?" Alliston was standing over his desk, poring over some papers in a drawer. He pulled out a large one and spread it out on the desktop. Lorne shifted his direction and noticed it was a blueprint for the King's Hall, complete with all floors, rooms, and windows. What is this? Where did you even get this? Lauren said, partly petrified and partly impressed. Alliston was already across the room, pulling a small plank from the wall behind a short drawer table. He pulled out a sliver of paper and took it back over to the desk and laid it down next to the blueprints. Lauren only saw scribbles on the piece of paper, a script unrecognizable to him. Got it, Cole said, crashing back in through the front door. Lauren ducked out of the way of the satchel as Cole threw it across the room to Alliston, who caught it in stride to the dining table. He cleared one end of the table with a wide swing of his arm, pushing all the dishes to the center. The satchel was thrown onto the table, and Alliston fished out a rather ugly brownish black overcoat. He turned it over and stretched the fabric on the back as tight as he could. Lauren noticed what appeared to be white dust on the back of one of the shoulders. Here, Cole shouted from across the room, digging through a drawer. Alliston raised his hand even before looking and caught the piece of chalk Cole retrieved from the drawer. Alliston went back to the desk and picked up the small piece of paper that had been hidden in the wall and threw it down on the coat. Can someone please explain to me what is going on? Lauren said, struggling to keep up with the flurry of activity around it. Cole came over and leaned over the table. Alliston took the chalk and placed the tip on the back of the shoulder. He slowly and intentionally began redrawing the symbol from the piece of paper. As he drew it, one could hear him mumbling to himself, a single word over and over, but in no language he could place. The character's last stroke was written, and a breeze picked up the coat seemingly from underneath it. As if Alliston's hand hadn't been on top of it, it would have blown clear to the ceiling. And in an instant, the breeze faded. Alliston, Lauren said, staring at the strange happenings. What is going on? Lauren, I have a solution for your problem. Both of you sit down. Cole and Lauren slid back into their chairs at the table as Alliston struggled over his decision. Lauren, I have not been in Throne Fast, ever, in protest for Corinna, my love. Cole, on the other hand, has. Lauren looked over at Cole, and then up at Alliston, still utterly confused. Alliston grabbed some dark chalk and his blueprint and laid them on the table after sliding the mysterious cloak to Cole. I have been following Narian's research much closer than you probably are aware. I have a few busybodies in my employ working as servants in Narian. I also may have sent Cole a time or two to fetch some items that were difficult to acquire. Lauren snapped his head back and forth at Cole, who was smiling largely, and Alliston, who was not. Narian's research has led to the realization that there are certain words in High Dragon dialect, along with their spoken counterpart, imbue certain magical qualities on items in varying fashions. Take the cloak, for example. I've worked out by various means that by writing the High Dragon word for peace and uttering it, the item bearing the mark will make little to no sound and have little effect on objects that it comes in contact with. Cole, still smiling, took the coat as he was holding it and threw it at the dishes piled at the other end of the table. It tumbled as it normally would across the tabletop, but made no sound, and the only item on the table that moved was a tall pepper shaker that wobbled slightly as the coat fell off the end of the table. Lauren looked on, amazed. He'd never seen magic quite like this before. Generally, incantations had a much less effect at a great physical effort from the one performing the incantation. This required no effort, seemingly, from Alliston. It was very potent in its effect. Narian knows about this? Lauren said, grasping the weight of the potential of this newfound power. As I mentioned, Cole has rescued a few items from the drawers of Narian's study. A time or two. You can guess that such a cloak, which when worn passed along its properties to the wearer, would be most useful in the clandestine arts. Cole happens to have a knack for such things, it would seem. Alliston put his hand on his hip, tried to brush it off, still not quite looking Lauren in the eye. So, what does any of this have to do with the king? Lauren said, trying his best to overlook the obvious crimes of his two friends. You must swear to me that the knowledge of this plan must not leave our conversation. You cannot alert a soul if this is to work properly, Lauren. Alliston warned. Alliston looked over at Cole. This time, Alliston's face carried an empathetic heaviness to it, a weight on his brow that took the smile from Cole's face. Cole, I have loved you like my own son, and I've trained you like you were Corinna and Hanai's son, trying to make them proud of the warrior they would have raised you to be. Alliston knelt down beside Cole's chair and put his hands on his shoulder. I have tried to instill modesty and compassion in you, but those are virtues of peace. War has different virtues, Cole. Even when defending your home, wrath and violence are your garments. You must fill your heart with fire, understand? You had a fire in you already years ago. You bring it out now. Alliston's eyes grew soft as he stared at the young man before him. He thought of the young boy who had cried in his arms many times thinking of his mother. He had taught him to honor her memory in his honor and commitment. And this time, he needed to honor her memory in service to their people. Lauren looked at the inspired Cole, so confident and strong. With his skills, he completely forgot most of the time about his handicap. Cole, Lauren said, cutting in. I want you to know, when you are ready, you have a place at my side in the army of men. Cole had been torn for some time over his family's commitment to the men of Terminus, and Alliston's defiance of its leadership. He understood Alliston's complaints about the corrupting power. His love for his mother and her devotion to her soldiers was one of his strongest memories, and he would not betray that devotion. I'll be ready, Lauren, Cole said, and looked back at Alliston. It's time I took my place. Cole turned to the map in front of him and received instructions from Alliston. Yeah, the young man said to Cole. Sounds like a real slice of paradise growing up at the old farm. So, what? You decided it was so wonderful growing up without your parents and some back-breaking farmhand, you wanted to pass that experience down to me? Is that it? Cole had been waiting for that, and yet he wasn't ready for it when he was said out loud. He dropped his head for just a moment, realized his weakness, and raised his stare back up to his son. Your mother was better off without me. She was a tough woman, good soldier. But the paths of our lives diverged shortly after you were born, Cole said. There's a burden, a curse on our family that comes in the form of sacrifice for the greater good. We all run from it, and yet somehow it finds us wherever we are. Once your mother died, I set you up with the assets I had acquired from my family, sent you to a place far away from the capital and all the evil that accompanies it, to live a peaceful life on the eastern coast. No, actually what happened was, I was taken from everything I knew and dumped with an old man in the middle of nowhere. At least I no longer care why you didn't want me. I know now you're messed up old man with grandiose delusions, and I am so glad I wasn't raised by you. Cole nodded at the young man, granting the notion. You're right. I had no idea what I was thinking. Tell me something, Cater, son of Cole, son of Hanai. Do you know how to ride? Cater looked back at him, obviously not as uncaring as he was making himself out to be, that his father abandoned him. Before he had a chance to answer, Cole pressed again. Do you know how to fight? Cole asked, in an almost taunting tone. Are you stronger than your peers? Are your reflexes heightened due to work you have endured? Do you dream of adventure, welcome conflict like an old friend? Cole sat there as his estranged son stewed on the questions for a moment. Now you may think, Cole continued, that your life has been a series of horrible mishaps, or bad luck, or blind chance. But I can assure you, nothing is further from the truth. Your life, my young son, has a purpose. Cole listened to his own words to Cater. They seemed to be aimed at himself just as much. He stared across the room. Busy, ordinary people, living their ordinary lives in their ordinary towns, with their ordinary families. He pitied him, but he wanted so much to be one.